Vermeer's first dated painting is the Procuress, and it dates from 1656. It measures roughly 56 by 51 inches, and it is a genre apparent, or a genre looking kind of scene, but really it's not true genre. There's still some moralization going on here. And in fact, this is a brothel house scene, as the name suggests. And these types of scenes were actually popular in the Netherlands. There had been artists creating these scenes in the 16th century, and that continued into the 17th century. We even saw it within the Utrecht Caravaggiste, and we know that Vermeer's mother-in-law owned a painting of the Procuress by Dirk van Barbaren, which dates from 1622. So these Procuress types of scenes were kind of dealing with the subject of mercenary love, and originally they had been really closely associated with the New Testament parable of the prodigal son. So the prodigal son is the one who takes his inheritance and he goes out and he kicks up his heels and he spends his money on wine and women and partying. And it was kind of a way for these Dutch artists, Rembrandt included, to show a merry company scene, but still keep some kind of moralization in there by having these biblical types of allusions. It's really interesting to think about this subject matter in terms of Vermeer and his upbringing. We know that his father owned an inn where this type of drinking and partying and even sex peddling would have been happening. He would have really been kind of aware of that by living there. In addition, just by living in a city center, he would have been aware, even as a child, of these kinds of situations. So it's interesting to consider this subject not only in the context of it being a subject that's portrayed by many Dutch artists like the Utrecht Caravaggiste and Rembrandt, who were influences on Vermeer, but also in terms of Vermeer's own life experience. So what we see here in the Procuress is actually quite different than the later works that Vermeer becomes known for. Instead of the calm tranquility of upper-class domestic spaces, which is something that Vermeer is really appreciated for, we instead see the young prostitute in yellow. We see the two gentlemen gaming, drinking, partying, getting ready to enjoy her favors. And we also see the Procuress in the back, the figure with the black headdress. What's interesting is that this man in the red is being very overt about his intentions. If we were to look at just the girl on her own, there are a few things that might make us think that she's wholesome, right? The dress that she wears, the cap that she wears, these are pretty modest types of clothing. And so that doesn't really kind of match with what we now expect of her based on the actions. There are some clues though. If we look at the way that she holds her glass, we can see that she kind of just grasps it with all of her fingers, just kind of holds onto it with her whole fist. That's really lower class. It's really less refined than one would expect for someone who had been trained in the manners of the day. So even though her dress doesn't seem to be that immodest, and even though it seems to actually be even something that was, maybe a little more expensive than normal dress of the time, we are made aware as we look more closely at the work of her lower class kind of station. Of the two male figures, we've got the figure in red, but then we also have the figure on the left who's looking out toward us. And he's dressed up. He's wearing a nice beret. He's got the slit sleeves of his jerkin, which are really like in fashion at that time. He has a musical instrument. He is one who shows himself to be someone with wealth, someone with money. Interestingly, many scholars think that this is likely a self-portrait of Vermeer. Vermeer kind of putting himself in the guise of the prodigal son, which is something that Rembrandt had also done as well. So why would these artists portray themselves in such a way that seems to be a little bit unflattering? Really, it just kind of goes along with the whole outlook of the time, which was very much focused on being prepared to meet your final judgment. In the Protestant mindset, there was a recognition that man was fallen, they were prone to sin, and that they needed to accept God's grace in order to be saved from that sin. And we see those kinds of themes in Dutch 17th century works very often. Sins, sinfulness, follies, foolishness. These are things that can be shown in works of art as a warning to viewers to avoid the same sorts of behaviors. So in a roundabout way, It's a way to kind of remind everyone of their eternal goals of being ready to meet their kind of Christian maker. And actually, as the 17th century progresses, we're going to see that these brothel scenes become less and less religious. They start to be more and more revelrous, and that's something that we're starting to see happening in this Procuress scene by Vermeer. So when we look at this work on the whole, it's just a point to kind of take as a contrast to what Vermeer will later do and the directions he will later take. He will really leave this kind of subject matter behind and move into something that is more still, more meditative, more ennobling for women and their daily domestic lives.